Hello and welcome back to Clarkenomics. In this video we are going to conclude our discussion of what shifts a demand curve. So one final reminder, can't stress it enough. Increase right, decrease left. When demand increases, it is shifting to the right, such as D1 to D3. When demand is decreasing, it's shifting to the left, such as D1 to D2. So remember, don't say up or down, say left or right, increase or decrease. And let's just jump into it here. So this demand shifter is about substitute goods. This is about the prices of substitutes. You'll sometimes hear it described as prices of related goods. So substitutes are goods that are interchangeable for each other. Instead of buying X, you buy Y. So the question being asked here is, how much do substitutes for a certain good cost? And the best way to explain this is just to really look at an example. So we're going to ditch the pizza example from the previous videos here, and we're going to just talk about two abstract goods that are nothing real, goods X and good Y. So good X and good Y are very close substitutes in consumption. What that means is people can either buy one or the other, and they'll achieve mostly the same thing. So they're substitutes in consumption. They can buy one or the other. They're very close substitutes. So let's imagine for a second here that the price of good X rises. Let's think about that. So now good X is more expensive. What are consumers going to do in response? Well, they don't want as much of good X anymore. The quantity demanded of good X is going to decrease, and people are going to jump ship and they're going to go buy a substitute for good X. What's the substitute for good X? Good Y. So if the price of good X increases, the demand for good Y is going to shift to the right. So the price of good Y never actually changes. It was the price of good X that changed. But the price of good X changing is actually going to shift the entire demand curve for good Y. On the flip side, if the price of good X were to fall, that makes good X more attractive for consumers. They're like, whoa, the price of good X went down. I want me some good X. So they're going to go buy more of good X. The quantity demanded of good X is going to increase. But what that's going to do is it's going to decrease the demand for good Y. So because good X is cheaper, it's more attractive, meaning everyone's going to stop buying as much good Y, and they're going to go buy good X. So you're going to see a shift left in the demand for good Y. So that's how that works. The price changing of one good can actually change the demand for another good. Now, one thing to note about this is the price of good Y is never actually changing. So if it were changing, this would be a movement along the demand curve for good Y, but the price of good Y never changes. I never said anything about that. We only talked about changes in the price of the substitute, in this case what we called good X. So that's an important thing to remember. All right, now the final shifter here is actually pretty similar. It's about a relationship between two types of goods, only on this next slide we're not dealing with substitutes in consumption, we're dealing with complements in consumption. So the question here is, how much does a complement for the good cost? Well, first things first, we should talk about what a complementary relationship is. A complementary relationship is where two goods are used together frequently. So maybe cars and gasoline, or popcorn and soda at the movies, right? They're not substitutes for each other. You wouldn't buy one instead of the other. You buy these things because they go together, peanut butter and jelly, something like that. And this is going to create a relationship between the two goods. So imagine this time we've got good A and good B. And these two goods are complements in consumption, right? People buy them together because for whatever reason, we don't know what it is, they go well together. So imagine that the price of good A falls. Good A becomes cheaper. How are consumers going to react? Well, they're going to buy more of good A. The quantity demanded of good A is going to increase. People are going to buy more of it because it's cheaper. If people buy more of good A, and we know because of the relationship that people buy these two goods together, we're going to see an increase in the demand for good B. So people buy more of good A because the price is less. They're going to buy more of good A. They're going to also buy more of good B because they are complements in consumption. That's going to shift the demand for good B to the right. Let's imagine the opposite happens. The price of good A rises. That means that, well, the quantity demanded of good A is going to decrease. People don't want as much of good A anymore because, well, it's more expensive. So if people are buying less of good A, they're also going to be buying less of good B because these two things are substitutes. And the demand for good B is going to shift to the left. So in the real world, imagine a situation where cars become much more expensive, right? If cars become more expensive, people don't buy as many cars. And if people don't buy as many cars, they won't buy as much gasoline. Those are complementary goods. So that's how this relationship works. And just kind of similar to the last slide, the price of good B is never actually changing here. So it's not a movement along the curve kind of situation. It was the price of a related good, in this case a complement called good A, that actually changed. So when you're answering like assessment questions or something like that, just because you see the word price changing doesn't mean it's a movement along the demand curve. What it means is you have to pay attention to what good is the price changing, right? If it's the demand, if it's good B for which the price is changing, that would be a movement along the demand curve for good B. But if it's a change in the price of good A related good, then it's going to be a shift of the demand for good B. So it can be a little hard to keep track of on occasion, but if you remember those rules, you'll be just fine. So that's the final two demand shifters that we have, substitutes and complements in consumption. Thank you for watching.